Part 1, Chapter 4A of The Adventures of Jimmie Dale. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. The Adventures of Jimmie Dale by Frank L. Packard. Reading by Maire Rhode. Part 1, The Man in the Case. Chapter 4A, The Counterfeit Five. It was still early in the evening, but a little after 9 o'clock. The Fifth Avenue bus wended its way, jouncing its patrons, particularly those on the top seats, across town and turned into Riverside Drive. A short distance behind the bus, a limousine rolled down the cross street leisurely, silently. As the lights of passing craft on the Hudson and a myriad scintillating, luminous points dotting the west shore came into view, Jimmie Dale rose impulsively from his seat on the top of the bus, descended the little circular iron ladder at the rear, and dropped off into the street. It was only a few blocks farther to his residence on the drive, and the night was well worth the walk. Besides, restless, disturbed, and perplexed in mind, the walk appealed to him. He stepped across the sidewalk and proceeded slowly along. A month had gone by and he had not heard a word from her. The break on West Broadway, the murder of Metzer in Moriarty's gambling hell, the theft of Markel's diamond necklace, had followed each other in quick succession, and then this month of utter silence, with no sign of her, as though, indeed, she had never existed. But it was not this temporary silence on her part that troubled Jimmie Dale now. In the years that he had worked with this unknown, mysterious accomplice of his, whom he had never seen, there had been longer intervals than a bare month in which he had heard nothing from her. It was not that. It was the failure, total, absolute, and complete. That was the only result for the month of ceaseless, unremitting, doggedly expended effort, even as it had been the result many times before, in an attempt to solve the enigma that was so intimate and vital a factor in his own life. If he might lay any claims to cleverness, his resourcefulness, at least he was forced to admit, was no match for hers. She came, she went without being seen, and behind her remained, instead of clues to her identity, only an amazing, intangible mystery that left him at times appalled and dismayed. How did she know about those conditions in West Broadway? How did she know about Metzer's murder? How did she know about Markel and Wilbur? How did she know about 100 other affairs of the same sort that had happened since that night, years ago now, when out of pure adventure he had tampered with Marx's, the jeweler's strong room in Maiden Lane, and she had, mysteriously then too, solved his identity, discovered him to be the Gray Seal? Jimmie Dale, wrapped up in his own thoughts, entirely oblivious to his surroundings, traversed another block. There had never been since the world began, and there would never be again, so singular and bizarre a partnership as this, of hers and his. He, Jimmie Dale, with his strange double life, one of New York's young bachelor millionaires, one whose social status was unquestioned, and she, who what? That was just it. Who what? What was she? What was her name? What one personal, intimate thing did he know about her? And what was to be the end? Not that he would have severed his association with her, not for worlds, though every time that, by some new and curious method, one of her letters found its way into his hands, outlining some fresh coup for him to execute, his peril and danger of discovery was increased in staggering ratio. Today the police hunted the Gray Seal as they hunted a mad dog. The papers stormed and raved against him. In every detective bureau of 2 continents he was catalogued as the most notorious criminal of the age, and yet, strangely paradoxed, no single crime had ever been committed. Jimmie Dale's strong, fine-featured face lighted up. crime. Thanks to her, there were those who blessed the name of the Gray Seal, those into whose lives had come joy, relief of misery, escape from death even. And their blessings were worth 1,000-fold the risk and peril of disaster that threatened him at every minute of the day. "Thank God for her," murmured Jimmie Dale softly. But if I could only find her, see her, know who she is, talk to her, and hear her voice." Then he smiled a little wanly. "It's been a pretty tough month, and nothing to show for it." It had. It had been one of the hardest months through which Jimmie Dale had ever lived. The St. James, that most exclusive club, his favorite haunt, had seen nothing of him. The easel in his den that was his hobby had been untouched. There had been days even when he had not crossed the threshold of his home. Every resource at his command he called into play in an effort to solve the mystery. For nearly the entire month, following first this lead and then that, he had lived in the one disguise that he felt confident she knew nothing of. That was sanctuary, that miserable and disreputable room in a tenement on the East Side, a tenement that had 3 separate means of entrance and exit. He had emerged day after day as Larry the Bat, a character as well known and as well liked in the exclusive circles of the underworld as was Jimmie Dale in the most exclusive strata of New York's society and fashion. It had been useless, all useless. Through his own endeavors, through the help of his friends of the underworld, the lives of half a dozen men, Bert Hagan's on West Broadway, for instance, Markel's, and others, had been laid bare to the last shred, but nowhere could be found the one vital point that linked their lives with hers, that would account for her intimate knowledge of them, and so furnish him with the clue that would then with certainty lead him to a solution of her identity. It was baffling, puzzling, unbelievable, bordering indeed on the miraculous. Herself, everything about her, her acts, her methods, her cleverness, intangible in one sense, were terrifically real in another. Jimmie Dale shook his head. The miraculous and this practical, everyday life were wide and far apart. There was nothing miraculous about it. It was only that the key to it was, so far, beyond his reach. And then suddenly Jimmie Dale shrugged his shoulders in consonance with a whimsical change in both mood and thought. "Larry the Bat is a hard taskmaster," he muttered facetiously. "I'm afraid I'm not very presentable this evening. No bath this morning, and no shave, and after nearly a month of make-up, that beastly grease paint gets into the skin creases in a most intimate way." He chuckled as the thought of old Jason, his butler, came to him. I saw Jason, torn between 2 conflicting emotions, shaking his head over the black circles under my eyes last night. He didn't know whether to worry over the first signs of a galloping decline, or break his heart at witnessing the young master he had dandled on his knees going to the damnation bow-wows and turning into a confirmed roo. I guess I'll have to mind myself, though. Even Carruthers detached his mind far enough from his editorial desk and the hope of exclusively publishing the news of the Gray Seal's capture in the Morning News Argus to tell me I was looking seedy. It's wonderful the way a little paint will metamorphose a man. Well, anyway, here's for a good hot tub tonight and a fresh start. He quickened his pace. There were still 3 blocks to go, and here was no hurrying, jostling crowd to impede his progress. Indeed, as far as he could see up the drive, there was not a pedestrian in sight. And then, as he walked involuntarily, insistently, his mind harked back into the old groove again. "I've tried to picture her," said Jimmie Dale softly to himself. "I've tried to picture her 100, yes, 1,000 times, and—" A bus, rumbling cityward, went by him, squeaking, creaking, and rattling in its uneasy joints, and out of the noise, almost at his elbow it seemed, a voice spoke his name, and in that instant intuitively he knew, and it thrilled him, stopped the beat of his heart as, dulcet, soft, clear as the note of a silver bell, it fell, and only one word, "Jimmie." He whirled around. A limousine, wheels just grazing the curb, was gliding slowly and silently past him, and from the window a woman's arm, white-gloved and dainty, was extended, and from the fingers to the pavement fluttered an envelope, and the car leaped forward. For the fraction of a second Jimmie Dale stood dazed, immovable, a gamut of emotions, surprise, fierce exultation, amazement, a strange joy, a mighty uplift swirling upon him. And then, snatching up the envelope from the ground, he sprang out into the road after the car. It was the one chance he had ever had, the one chance she had ever given him, and he had seen a white-gloved arm. He could not reach the car, it was speeding away from him like an arrow now, but there was something else that would do just as well, something that with all her cleverness she had overlooked, the car's number dangling on the rear axle, the rays of the little lamp playing on the enameled surface of the plate. Gasping, panting, he held his own for a yard or more, and there floated back to him a little silvery laugh from the body of the limousine, and then Jimmie Dale laughed too, and stopped. It was number 15,836. He stood and watched the car disappear up the drive. What delicious irony! A month of grueling, ceaseless toil that had been vain, futile, useless, and the key, when he was not looking for it, unexpectedly, through no effort of his, was thrust into his hand, number 15,836. Jimmie Dale, the gently ironic smile still on his lips, those slim, supersensitive fingers of his, subconsciously noting that the texture of the envelope was the same as she always used, retraced his steps to the sidewalk. Number 15,836, said Jimmie Dale aloud, and halted at the curb as though rooted to the spot. It sounded strangely familiar, that number. He repeated it over again slowly. 15836. And the smile left his lips, and upon his face came the look of a chastened child. She had used a duplicate plate. 15,836 was the number of one of his own cars, his own particular runabout. For a moment longer he stood there, undecided whether to laugh or swear, and then his eyes fastened mechanically on the envelope he was twirling in his fingers. Here, at least, was something that was not elusive, that, on the contrary, as 100 others in the past had done, outlined probably a grim night's work ahead for the Gray Seal, and, if it were as those others had been, every minute from the moment of its receipt was precious time. He stepped under the nearest street light and tore the envelope open. "Dear Philanthropic Crook," it began, and then followed 2 closely written pages. Jimmie Dale read them, his lips growing gradually tighter, a smoldering light creeping into his dark eyes, and once he emitted a short, low whistle of consternation. That was at the end, as he read the postscript that was heavily underscored. "Work quickly. They will raid tonight. Be careful. Look out for Kline. He is the sharpest man in the United States Secret Service." For a brief instant longer Jimmie Dale stood under the street lamp, his mind in a lightning-quick way cataloguing every point in her letter, viewing every point from a myriad angles, constructing, devising, mapping out a plan to dovetail into them. And then Jimmie Dale swung on a downtown bus. There was neither time nor occasion to go home now. that marvelous little kit of burglar's tools that peeped from their tiny pockets in that curious leather undervest, and that reposed now in the safe in his den, would be useless to him tonight. Besides, in the breast pocket of his coat, neatly folded, was a black silk mask, and relics of his role of Larry the Bat, an automatic revolver, an electric flashlight, a steel jimmy, and a bunch of skeleton keys were distributed among the other pockets of his smart tweed suit. Jimmie Dale changed from the bus to the subway, leaving behind him, strewn over many blocks, the tiny and minute fragments into which he had torn her letter. At Astor Place he left the subway, walked to Broadway, turned uptown for a block to 8th Street, then along 8th Street almost to 6th Avenue, and stopped. A rather shabby shop, a pitiful sort of a place, displaying in its window a heterogeneous conglomeration of cheap odds and ends, ink bottles, candy, pencils, cigarettes, pens, toys, writing pads, marbles, and a multitude of other small wares, confronted him. Within, a little old, sweet-faced, gray-haired woman stood behind the counter, pottering over the rearrangement of some articles on the shelves. "My word," said Jimmie Dale softly to himself, "you wouldn't believe it, would you? And I've always wondered how these little stores manage to make both ends meet. Think of that old soul making $15,000 or $20,000 from a layout like this, even if it has taken her a lifetime." Jimmie Dale had halted nonchalantly and unconcernedly by the curb, not too near the window, busied apparently in an effort to light a refractory cigarette, and then, about to enter the store, he gazed aimlessly across the street for a moment instead. A man came briskly around the corner from 6th Avenue, opened the store door, and went in. Jimmie Dale drew back a little and turned his head again as the door closed, and a sudden, quick, alert, and startled look spread over his face. The man who had entered bent over the counter and spoke to the old lady. She seemed to listen with a dawning terror creeping over her features, and then her hands went piteously to the thin hair behind her ears. The man motioned toward a door at the rear of the store. She hesitated, then came out from behind the counter, and swayed a little as though her limbs would not support her weight. Jimmie Dale's lips thinned. "I'm afraid," he muttered slowly, "I'm afraid that I'm too late even now." And then, as she came to the door and turned the key on the inside, "Pray heaven she doesn't turn the light out, or somebody might think I was trying to break in." But in that respect Jimmie Dale's fears were groundless. She did not turn out either of the gas jets that lighted the little shop. Instead, in a faltering, reluctant sort of manner, she led the way directly through the door in the rear, and the man followed her. The shop was empty, and Jimmie Dale was standing against the door on the outside. His position was perfectly natural. 100 passers-by would have noted nothing but a most commonplace occurrence, a man in the act of entering a store. And if he appeared to fumble and have trouble with the latch, what of it? Jimmie Dale, however, was not fumbling. Hidden by his back that was turned to the street, those wonderful fingers of his, in whose tips seemed embodied and concentrated every one of the human senses, were working quickly, surely, accurately, without so much as the wasted movement of a single muscle. A faint tinkle, and the key within fell from the lock to the floor. A faint click, and the bolt of the lock slipped back. Jimmie Dale restored the skeleton keys and a little steel instrument that had accompanied them to his pocket, and quietly opened the door. He stepped inside, picked up the key from the floor, inserted it into the lock, closed the door behind him, and locked it again. "To guard against interruption," observed Jimmie Dale, a little quizzically. He was perhaps 30 seconds behind the others. He crossed the shop noiselessly, cautiously, and passed through the door at the rear. It opened into a sort of passage that after a few feet gave on a sort of corridor at right angles. And down this latter, facing him at the end, the door of a lighted room was open, and he could see the figure of the man who had entered the shop, back turned, standing on the threshold. Voices, indistinct, came to him. The corridor itself was dark, and Jimmie Dale, satisfied that he was fairly safe from observation, stole softly forward. He passed two doors on his left, and the curious arrangement of the building that had puzzled him for a moment became clear. The store made the front of an old tenement building, with apartments above, and the rear of the store was a sort of apartment, too, the old lady's living quarters. End of Part 1, Chapter 4A.